This is a presentation of the Sports Source Digital Network, presented by Hearthside Bank.
Why do wetlands mean more to the outdoors than just duck hunting? Next. Welcome into Sports Source Wild. I'm Bob Hodge, along with Joe Justice, and it feels like we just did this.
Just like
Mike Butler, CEO of the Tennessee Wildlife Federation. You joined us here a couple of weeks ago, and you're back again. Thank you for driving all the way from Nashville to Knoxville.
Yeah,
we appreciate that.
Glad to be here. Got a fun show, fun topic.
Yeah,
Well, we're going to find out how much fun it is in about a half an hour. So glad you're here. Glad Joe's here as always, kind of. And just want to remind everybody, right below us, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Please do that. It helps us out. Thank you very much.
And it don't cost nothing.
And it don't cost a dadgum penny. Not a dadgum penny. So what we want to do before we get into some of the topics that you're in here to talk with us about, get into a few notes about the outdoors. First one, I just want to talk about last week. I went to South Dakota and went pheasant hunting.
Oh, yeah?
It's one of those things I wanted to do from the time I was a little kid.
It's on my list for sure.
You're reading the outdoors magazines when you're 10, 11, 12, 13 years old, and you see the pictures of the dogs and the cornfields and the pheasants. And it was on a scale of 1 to 10. Now I've been on better hunts. I've been to other places that you go, it's even prettier. But as far as knocking off something off of my checklist that I wanted to do, it was hard to top.
Well, South Dakota is the pheasant capital of the world.
No doubt.
If you're a bird hunter, I mean, everybody has to make it to South Dakota at least once.
You got to stay at the Corn Palace at least once.
Well, there you go.
There you go.
Wall Drug, you got to go see it.
Yeah.
And it just, we were east of Wall Drug. But what was funny, we landed in the far eastern part of the state, in Sioux Falls. And so you're driving, and literally, you get on the interstate, and there's Wall Drug bulletin boards.
Everywhere.
Kind of like the Bucky signs on 40 now.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, they're every 6 miles.
Hey, what is it? Hey, this Wall Drug looks interesting. 322 miles or something like that. So we did make it there, but it was a great trip.
Did you kill some birds?
We killed birds, and it's a mixture of birds that the lodge puts out, along with wild birds. That's the reason every bird that you shoot has to be tagged. They have to be accounted for.
Really?
Because the state needs to know how many birds were put out, how many were brought back in. Because something I thought, and Mike, you and I talked about it, so did you and I, Joe. 25% of the birds that these places put out, they say survive.
When you think about it, these are pheasants from the East, the Orient, that they were brought to the United States. They're naturalized, but they're not native. And so it would make sense that those habitats approximate where they are originally from in their native countries. High, dry, steppe habitat, grassland, cropland, things like that. So it would make sense that you'd see some survivability.
Well,
25% is a good number.
25% I thought was a great number.
Yeah.
Because if you put out 25% of just about anything around here that's pen raised, farm grown,
right,
it ain't got a
so the avian
predators
are going the avian predators are going to wipe them out. I don't know that you can necessarily parlay that 25% into a breeding population or a nesting population, but there's going to be some holdovers.
Yeah, I mean, that's just it. They said they did hold over. We killed some wild birds, and the reason that the guy knew they were wild birds was the ones that are put out there in the field when you're hunting have very short spurs, and we killed 2 or 3 that have really
big hooks
long,
on them like a gobbler.
I mean, trust me, I've killed some gobblers that wish they had those spurs.
No doubt.
So it was a lot of fun. Something else I want to talk about right quick. The state of Utah is saying that if you're going to be on their wildlife commission, you have to buy a hunting license. And Joe, you sent that story over.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. They're just trying to make sure that the people that are on the Wildlife Commission are sportsmen, and outdoor sports have a background in that, hunting, fishing, and not somebody in there with maybe not the interest of the hunters, the best interest of the hunters in mind. So I think it's a good thing.
You've had that challenge in some other states out west where folks that are completely against hunting are
Colorado
getting put on. Oregon, places like that, I believe, are having people come on to there, and there actually are movements and deliberative efforts to do that. Okay, it's not just happening by accident. So that's one of the reasons why last year I was talking to you about, Bob. The Federation helped write and develop legislation that the General Assembly passed that is now law. We called it the Hunting is Conservation Bill. And what it does is it says that that hunting and fishing shall be the preferred methods of management for wildlife and fish in the state of Tennessee. And anybody coming onto the commission needs to be well-versed and knowledgeable in the areas that the agency regulates. So it puts a little bit more qualification on people coming onto the commission to make sure that we're keeping that management mentality with hunting and fishing first and foremost.
I think that's fantastic. And I also think it's fantastic that you're here, because you know why? Did you know that they did that? I didn't know that they did that. I didn't know TWF. I had no idea, and
I had forgotten about it because Mike, during the years when I was at the commission meetings all the time, and I'm not going to mention any names, and you heard the stories after I'd get back from the commission meetings, but we have had commissioners in the past who were sitting there listening to proposals from biologists, changing of game laws, changing bag limits, changing creel limits, that did not have a clue as to what was being talked about. And
don't even hunt.
I actually have a former Commissioner Hall of Fame where I list the dumbest commissioners that we ever had.
There's been several.
And I mean, put it this way, you could take a commission and make a commission of the dumbest commissioners.
From our radio days, I can remember one name in East Tennessee.
And I'll tell you, guys,
the bane of your existence.
We've been really blessed. I have to say this. We've been really blessed to have a solid run of commissioners for about the last 3 governors.
Yeah.
We just had 4 get appointed and approved this past week down at the General Assembly. They're all solid folks. And part of that is, working with the administration to make sure that they're really solid people that are recruited and said, this is important. It is arguably the most sought after board or commission in state government. It used to be UT Board of Trustees was number 1. I think the commission is now
getting up there.
It's equivalent at this point, from what I'm hearing.
But still, I think it's fantastic because that's what we're trying to do here with this program is let all the hunters, let your average hunter know what's going on in Tennessee and surrounding states. I didn't know that had happened and those considerations were changed and everything like that. So I think it's huge. I think it's good stuff.
It was interesting in that story you sent me that it pointed out Washington State. Okay, don't know much about Washington State, but Colorado, where I'm thinking about going hunting again next fall, they're one of the states that they have basically packed it with people who aren't about game and wildlife management.
Exactly.
And so that's the reason you're having problems with, okay, we've got wolves, we're not mountain lions.
And that reflects the leader of the state. The leadership of the state of Colorado is reflecting that through their appointments.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more there that we could go into for a long time. We could do a whole show on what's going on in Colorado.
And I'm holding my comments, so we'll go from there.
And this week's poacher update.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
I like talking about poachers. Well, out in Oregon, they have a feller, and they stripped him for life of his right to hunt and fish. For life. They just did
so
it.
Nothing,
2 weeks
no hunting,
ago.
no fishing, nothing.
But it's the 3rd time they've done it.
Right.
So this guy has now been stripped of his right to hunt.
Sounds like a cat.
For 3 times.
9 lives.
For life.
Yeah. What are you taking away from him?
And here's my question. Here's what you take. Put him in jail.
Exactly.
Put him in jail.
100%.
I don't see how you solve the problem by, okay, you can't hunt and fish for the rest of your life. Again.
Yeah.
Put him in jail.
Where's the punishment in that? Well, it just goes to show you that outlaws are going to be outlaws no matter what the laws are. If somebody wants to break them, they're going to. I mean, it doesn't matter. Shooting them from the road, shooting them with no license, shooting them at night, shooting them with no tags. I mean, you can look at some of these some of these other YouTubers out there. I mean, the list goes on of some of the infractions I've seen. So
No doubt.
Well, that is our poaching up.
There's so much more things to talk about than doing a weekly poaching update. I think it's fun, but there's a lot of positive things out there. I mean,
There
it's
are
springtime fishing.
positive
Crappie are biting.
things.
No doubt.
Crappie are biting. Matter of fact, we're probably going to be talking about that.
It's sauger time. Actually, sauger time's kind of winding down.
Kind of winding down.
It's
just a
walleye
touch.
time. It's shed antler hunting. I mean, that's a Kentucky shed I found last year. So, you can get out
found
there.
that last
And this
year.
is the Kentucky shed you
Well,
found this year.
and that's the one I found this year. So, it's a monster.
And
But
how
that-
long-
What's going on in Kentucky?
4.5 miles.
Yeah. You
Oh,
walked
there is-
4.5 miles to find that.
I did.
Well, and you're right. We're going to be updating more things than just poachers. But I just think that is a fascinating, and the bad part of our sport is you've got these people out there. Now, it doesn't matter what you do, you got bad eggs, bad apples, bad. Can we think
True.
of another thing that goes bad that we can throw
Right.
in with eggs?
We've
and
got
apples?
an elk that was poached that we're part of an effort to offer a reward for that
Yeah.
elk up in Campbell County.
We spoke about that a couple of
And
weeks ago. So I am kind of fascinated about it, but you're right. We need to sit here and talk about the things, but don't interrupt me again.
Well, it's I'm going to right now.
And where are you muskie fishing, Joe?
The muskie may be biting, but we're not going to out any lakes or reservoirs. No lakes or
Stay
reservoirs.
tuned for the longitude and latitude
Yeah.
of where Joe's catching
Well,
fish.
well, it is unfortunate because the poachers and the ones that actually commit these infractions, breaking the law, that's generally what the public sees, and that's what rises to the
Well,
top.
they're stealing
So
from the public.
I see the importance of it, but there's a lot of happy things. We could have like a good news moment in the outdoors.
Yeah.
So Sports Source Wild Happy
There you go.
is what we can call it. And last thing before we kind of get into today's topic a little bit, but down in Sweetwater, we did a show on it a few weeks ago. The most watched show that we've had. So thank everybody who tuned in and listened to us talk about this. But the duck hunters who were cited for illegally discharging a firearm inside the city limits of Sweetwater, it went to court. They lost, but
yeah?
it is going to go further.
Well, and that was not unexpected. Our man Horace Tipton was in the courtroom during the trial. We expected municipal court to support the city and their position. That's exactly what happened. So it will now be appealed to circuit court. And the Federation's board voted at our last board meeting that we will be filing what is called an amicus brief or a friend of the court brief to support the waterfowl hunters in their argument before the court. And, we expect a more favorable consideration at circuit court. Can't
Interesting.
guarantee anything,
Right.
but what happened was not a surprise. That's the take.
And it's not a surprise it's going to go on.
Exactly.
And it's just going to keep whatever happens next, just keeps going up the food chain. And you know how come I knew what an amicus brief is? Because when I was a kid, I watched Perry Mason.
There you go.
And Perry used to file them all the time. I think he carried amicus briefs in his back pocket.
You
always
have to
thought-
do a
always-
whole show on Perry Mason because nobody that's watching this probably is old enough to remember that.
That's what I was going to say. I always thought it was an amicus brief when I read it, in anything. I always thought it was amicus.
Yeah, there you
There's
go.
4 years of Latin in high school. That's the best I could come up
Then
with.
you're probably the expert on that.
I am close.
You were in Latin for 4 years.
I could conjugate it. Yes.
Wow. That's kind of impressive.
I started
You want to
early.
conjugate a wetland?
Yeah, well, that's what we're going to talk about next. Before we get into that,
Okay.
before we get into the wetland, I want to talk about the Wildlife Federation, everything that you guys do, and a part of it, and we've talked about Hunters for the Hungry. We've talked about the projects that you guys have going on across the state as far as habitat's concerned, but stuff like what's going on down in Sweetwater, stuff like what's going on down in Nashville right now where the legislature is in session and there is a ton of bills sitting out there, some good, some bad, some indifferent. That's a big part of what you guys do too.
It is, and in that, we break it up into about 3 different pieces. You have advocacy work, which is like we're advocating on behalf of the duck hunters at Sweetwater. Policy development. We wrote and researched the hunting and conservation bill last year.
Yeah.
And then we do governmental affairs work, which is making sure that those things get put into policy through act of the General Assembly or through rulemaking with one of the state agencies or whatever. So we're very active. We're the only statewide nonprofit conservation organization I know that has a permanent presence at Capitol Hill every year, year in, year out, and have done so since 1946.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that's back in the days when it was the old Tennessee Conservation League.
Correct.
TCL, yeah.
Originally,
TCL.
you know, a funny quick history bit. We were founded in 1937 originally as Tennessee Wildlife Federation. And when the war started, they disbanded to go fight in the war. They came back in 46, and it was the same group of people, but they changed the name. So when we went back to that in 2004, it wasn't a brand new name. We still had it, and we just revived it.
Wow. I'm sure you told me that at one time, but by being old enough to remember Perry Mason, I forgot.
There you go.
So thank you for everything you do.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, once again,
It's our
it doesn't
pleasure.
matter if it's out planting trees. It doesn't matter if it's out feeding people who need a little bit of something extra through Hunters for the Hungry. We appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. One thing I think is notable, you know, you can see while you're watching this, our website. We give away our information for free. We do not have members. We have friends and supporters, and we have people that are donors. If you want to donate, that's great. But we're wanting to find like-minded people to share our information with, to be part of the movement that we have. I don't want to put a barrier in front of somebody that wants to help. And so we don't want to put a financial barrier in front of somebody that can help but can contact their elected official, things like that. I think that's an
So
important
you can be a
distinction.
part of Tennessee Wildlife Federation, and it doesn't cost you anything.
It doesn't, except for a little time, probably.
Little time.
Little
Just
time.
like subscribing to our channel.
Right. It
Doesn't
don't cost
you
nothing.
anything.
It don't cost nothing.
So, and that kind of, great TV word, segue. We segue into something going on down there, Mike, that has its genesis in a 2023 Supreme Court ruling. And we're not talking about the Tennessee State Supreme Court. We're talking about the
United
big boy
States.
court up in Washington.
Yeah.
And it has to do with wetlands and how that ruling is maybe coming into play in Tennessee right now.
It does, and I'll frame it up just a little bit because I think the context is really important. There was a case called Sackett versus EPA, where some folks from Oregon sued the Environmental Protection Agency over their interpretation of the Clean Water Act and how it applied to what EPA said was a wetland that they were trying to build on next to their house, their new house they were building. The court took that case up and ruled pretty substantially that that the jurisdiction of the Clean Water Act in terms of federal protections for wetlands only extends to those wetlands that have a surface connection between the wetland and a navigable water. And now navigability of water is a legal definition. It's not can you ride your boat in it. But something,
I didn't know that.
Yes.
I thought it was you could write.
I did too. I thought if you could
there's a
float a canoe in it, you could
it
go.
gets complicated in the law, and I'm not an attorney, but there's navigable in fact and there's navigable by law. And there's distinctions there. And a lot of times a piece of water or a creek or a river, like in West Tennessee where I grew up, was determined to be navigable if it had commerce on it. And they moved a lot of cotton up and down the West Tennessee smaller rivers, and local judges would say this is a navigable water. Well, that rule of law has stuck. So what the court didn't say was wetlands are good or bad. They said this is where our jurisdiction ends, and there are a lot of people that believe they got it right. And then they said everything else that's a wetland that doesn't fall within our definition is up to the states to determine how they want to regulate their wetlands. So to put that in context, we have about 1.5 million plus acres approximately of wetlands remaining in the state of Tennessee. We've drained about 59% of our wetlands.
Wow, didn't know that.
Okay?
That's huge.
Of that 1.5 million plus acres, about 320,000 acres are of that type that fall into the state definition as a wetland.
About a fifth.
About a fifth. And so right now, our state has really good protections for wetlands. If you go and you need to fill one in, then you need to offset it. because the thing about wetlands is that not only do they provide fish and wildlife habitat, they are incredibly important for slowing water down, which helps manage flood intensity. And more importantly, people don't think about this. When you have water soaking through a wetland, it recharges groundwater, which is what keeps your creeks and streams flowing, because that water slowly feeds into those, and that's what keeps those healthy, right? So when you look at the 320,000 acres, we've got pretty good protections around those. But a piece of legislation was filed a couple of years ago that said, well, we want to do away with all of that at the state level and just follow what the feds say. So it would effectively remove any kind of conservation protections around those wetlands. And the reason that's important is because waters of the state of Tennessee are a public trust resource, meaning, like wildlife, they're held in trust by the state for the benefits of the citizens. Okay?
Gotcha.
So what we're at now is a debate and a discussion between those that would like to remove those protections and those of us that think we can improve upon the current situation. There's some things that have been happening that aren't the right way to handle the situation. One example is this. Right now, a regulator doesn't have the flexibility to come in and say a wetland is a high quality, low quality, or medium quality wetland. If they find something that meets the technical definition of a wetland, which has to do with vegetation and soil type and how long it's flooded, it's a wetland, period. There is no judgment around, well, this is
So who's deciding this? Who's deciding
the regulators from TDEC and the Corps of Engineers, depending on which body is in charge of that particular wetland.
Okay.
The problem is, and this has actually happened with one of the proponents of getting rid of the protections, there were tractor ruts in a bean field that had a cattail patch growing in them. And that was regulated as a wetland. Now, if you apply common sense...
That's a little overreach there.
It's overreach
That's
there.
a little much.
And so our position has been, look, we've got to be able, with these state wetlands at least, to say, here's one that's low quality, here's one that's medium quality, here's one that's high quality, and have a different outcome for each. Okay? That's really important, because not only is it commonsensical, it's how we are going to be able to be smarter in how we affect the landscape if you're a developer.
Well, yeah, that's true.
And we've all experienced when you have those that go out and say, I'm going to prop up an LLC and I'm going to build this thing, and then I'm going to close the doors, walk away, wipe my hands of it, I'm not accountable, nobody is. Oh, sorry, next door neighbor, that you're flooding.
Yeah.
Because we didn't handle our business the right way.
We built this on a vernal pool. Sorry. Oops.
Sorry. And so
the past 5 years have been a land grab. So all these developers are coming in to handle all the people that have moved to the area. And there really needs to be more organization, structuring, planning around our school systems, around our wastewater, everything. Yeah. Much less just destroying a wetland, be it an intermediate or a high level. We really need to sit back and look at where these subdivisions, apartment complexes, I know we need them. There's a bunch of people here. But we need to look at where they're going in and how they're going in, because there's a lot of land disappearing just like that.
Well, and I'll add this. The way that we have approached this is we've built a coalition of sportsmen's organizations that include Ducks Unlimited, Delta Waterfowl, American Sport Fishing Association, Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation, Safari Club International, and some others. And those groups are working alongside us, both down at General Assembly and in behind the scenes, to put together the compromise legislation that we've developed that comes at this thing and says, yeah, we need to be able to talk about that these things are not all the same. We need to be able to protect the high and the medium quality, and we need to be creative about the low quality. Low quality wetlands can be a farmed wetland, which is grown crops on every year. Does it have a lot of wildlife habitat value? Maybe, maybe not, depending on where it is.
Not directly.
But it has a lot of flood storage capacity value, right? Water, yes. Here's what my buddy says is a famous line, is water ain't magic. When it hits the landscape, it's gonna go somewhere. And wetlands, by design, are those places where it collects to filter through. It cleans water, slows it down, like I said before, and actually feeds our rivers and streams. And so to your point, we we're smart enough to figure out how to do this. Wetland protections have been around since the 70s. I looked it up. Our GDP in the state of Tennessee has grown 800% since that time. So nobody's being put out of business by wetland regulation.
Well, let me ask you, Mike, is as far as the people who, let's say you're on the other side of this issue. By golly, we've got 350 some odd thousand acres out there that we could be using for a shopping mall, a housing complex,
Dollar General,
whatever. Is it mostly people pushing it for this, for the less stringent regulation? Am I fair to say it's developers, or am I off base about that? And it's not just people out there
No,
looking to...
that's fair, but I think like in anything, they're not monolithic. You have some that are like, yeah, I get it, and we need to do it the right way. And you've got some that are like, I don't care, rape and pillage the land. And so you've got a spectrum. It's just like in anything else, you've got a spectrum of those folks that are across the board.
I have a question about something that didn't happen in the state of Tennessee. Matter of fact, it happened in Indiana. And a coal company was going to go in, and they were going to have a surface mine. And so they dug some drainage ditches on that surface mine. This is kind of going to your tractor rut thing. Well, funding, whatever, bad market. The development didn't happen in the year that they wanted it, or the next, or the next, or the next. But then when things turned around, once again, they got the funding, the market got better, whatever. They came back and said, all right, we were ready to go in here and have this coal mine. In that time, the drainage ditches that they had dug out had done like these tractor ruts you were talking about. They'd grown cattails. They had some wetlands type plants that had grown in them. They didn't hold water 24/7, 365, but when it was during the rainy season, they were wet. The project got shut down. Now, this wasn't a wetland. This wasn't anything. This was simply they had done some work. Further work got delayed.
The unintended consequences.
And then they got caught up in a bad situation.
Yeah.
I have sympathy for people like that.
And
now, with this, if the regulation to loosen and be less stringent on our regulations of wetlands, I mean, once again, I think I love wetlands. I think they're great. Spent a lot of time stomping around in them in my life. But at the same time, if I've done work and I've got a project, and nobody cares that if the project's fine, everything is in place, but work I've done turns into a wetland, I shouldn't lose my multi-million-dollar investment.
Well, here's where that problem comes in, and we see this. I saw it last year. There was a piece of farmland that was purchased by a guy. The seller said, oh, you can build whatever you want. He had advice from a consultant, bought the place, and then they come in and they say, you've got wetlands all over the place. Bad consultants lead to situations similar to that. The ones that don't do their job the right way will give advice. A good consultant is going to look at those situations and say, I know the rules, I know the regs, we need to be paying attention to X, Y, and Z, because if we come back in 3 years, here's what you could be facing.
Yeah.
It happened in Middle Tennessee on that particular piece of ground, and it created a big uproar. And yes, the guy spent a lot of money, but the negligence was on the part of the consultant, in my opinion, that they should have known better. If they'd have known what they were doing, because he hired another consultant to come in and said, I don't know what that guy was talking about, but there's wetlands all over the place out here. How does it get missed by that? People don't do their job well. And so there's a checks and balances that comes into that. And typically what I find in those stories is sometimes you'll have the tractor rut story, but more often than not, there's two sides to it, and somebody didn't do their job.
If as this thing progresses, and once again, you're the guy that knows how things move down in Nashville, or in some cases don't move down in Nashville, is there a timeline on this? Is there a way for people to keep up with, okay, you know, maybe you're somebody who happens to be watching this thing that goes, by golly, get rid of every wetland out there. I'm tired. Skeeters is the only thing you're going to find in a wetland. Or somebody out there saying, no, you save every square foot of anything like that. So what would be a timeline as this thing moves forward?
Well, we're hoping to be able to negotiate a compromise position with the other side here pretty short. I mean, The General Assembly's approaching the halfway point. We'd love to get that wrapped up this year. Last year, there wasn't a compromise bill, and so our efforts in the Senate were able to stop it and send it to what is called a summer study. There was actually a summer study done, and the Department of Environment and Conservation, with a bunch of stakeholders, issued a report that had a bunch of really sound recommendations on how to improve things. Our compromise bill the coalition has put together really relies on that report to inform what we think needs to happen moving forward. So it's not just our ideas. It's a lot of people's ideas that we've borrowed from to come together. But I think from a timeline, we would love to see it wrapped up this session in the next couple of months.
Okay. Yeah. Then see, I didn't even realize how much time was left next couple of months. I mean, I was thinking, in my mind, I had the session coming to an end here in a couple of weeks.
Well,
so April, I don't know where I've been.
Usually
hold it. I do know. I was in South Dakota.
You've been in South Dakota?
Mid-April is mid to late April is a regular target for when they close.
And there's other stuff which you guys, even when you're not here, you'll be able to keep us updated on. And when they comes here, me and Joe are going to talk about them. Joe, if somebody wants us to reach us by email, how would they go about doing it?
Well, you would catch us at sportsourcewild@gmail.com. And this don't cost nothing either.
And that doesn't cost anything. And you know, John Pennington wrote that. And that is very good handwriting.
It's remarkable penmanship.
I mean, I was looking at that. I kind of admire it because if I'd written it, you would be going, "What?"
Well, you did write it before, and people were going, "What?"
Yeah, people were going, "What?" So, Mike Butler from Nashville and Tennessee Wildlife Federation, thank you as always.
Always good to see you, Mike.
Absolutely.
And Joe, you and I will be back. Hopefully next week. I believe we will.
Same place,
but
same
hold
time.
it. This is on YouTube. Is there a next week?
I don't know. Is there today?
There you go.
You better hope there's a next week.
But we're gonna do this again. And everybody, once again, please like us, subscribe to us, and as Joe says, doesn't cost you nothing.